What if a revolution could be won not with bullets, but with words? That's the story of Fidel Castro. He used the power of his voice to write the script for the Cuban Revolution, change a country forever, and send shockwaves around the world. How? Exactly. The secret is hidden in the speeches that became his legacy. To get why Castro's words were so powerful, you have to picture the Cuba he wanted to append. Back in the 1950s, the island was a place of jarring contrasts. For a handful of rich people in Havana, it was a glamorous playground of casinos, lavish hotels, and shiny American cars. But for most Cubans, life was a completely different story. The country was run by Fulgencio Batista, a dictator who'd taken power in a military coup in 1952. His government was deeply corrupt and had cozy relationships with the American mob. Batista and his allies got rich. A huge part of the rural population lived in deep poverty, often without basics like electricity, running water, or schools. Unemployment was rampant, with some estimates putting the number of jobless Cubans as high as 700,000, and the gap between rich and poor was enormous. The United States wasn't just a tourist destination. It was the dominant force in Cuba's economy, controlling huge amounts of land and, most importantly, the sugar industry. This fueled a growing sense of frustration and anger. Many Cubans felt like they weren't in control of their own country's future. They were desperate for change, for a leader who could give voice to their anger and offer a real vision for something better. Into this tense and restless Cuba, a young lawyer named Fidel Castro was about to make his move. And on July 26, 1953, that spark was lit. Fidel Castro, who was still mostly unknown, led around 160 rebels in a bold attack on the Moncada barracks in Santiago de Cuba. Militarily, the attack was a total disaster. Castro's men were outnumbered and outgunned, and the rebellion was crushed almost immediately. Many of his fighters were killed, and Castro himself was captured. From a military standpoint, Moncada was a catastrophe. But politically, it was the beginning of everything. Batista's regime put the surviving rebels on trial, hoping to make an example of them and silence Castro for good. But they made a huge mistake. The trial didn't bury him, it gave him a platform, something more powerful than any weapon. And he was about to use it to turn his own defense into the founding text of the Cuban Revolution. On October 16, 1953, from a small hospital room where his trial was being held, Castro delivered a speech that would change everything. Acting as his own lawyer, he spoke for hours. But he wasn't really talking to the judges. He knew they'd convict him. He was talking to the Cuban people and to history itself. That speech, later published and distributed as History Will Absolve Me, became the revolution's founding document. It was a masterclass in persuasion. Castro, the lawyer, laid out a careful argument that he wasn't the criminal. Batista was, for violating Cuba's own 1940 constitution by seizing power. But it was more than just a legal defense. It was a blistering takedown of the Batista regime and a detailed blueprint for a new Cuba. He painted a powerful picture of the country's suffering, citing numbers on poverty, illiteracy, and poor healthcare. He spoke directly to the people he called the heart of the nation, the farm workers, the unemployed, and the teachers. Then he laid out his plan, 5 revolutionary laws, including restoring the Constitution, giving land back to farmers, and nationalizing utilities to break the power of foreign companies. He offered a vision of sovereignty and justice that tapped directly into the anger felt across the island. He wasn't just a rebel anymore. He was a visionary. He ended with a line that would become legendary. "Condemn me, it does not matter. History will absolve me." Sentenced to 15 years, Castro had lost the Battle of Moncada. But with that speech, he won the first major battle for hearts and minds. He was no longer just a failed rebel. He was a national hero. After Batista granted him amnesty in 1955, Castro didn't stick around. He went to Mexico, where he, his brother Raul, and a certain Argentine doctor named Che Guevara planned their return. In December 1956, they came back to Cuba on a small yacht, the Granma, to start a guerrilla war. From their hideout in the rugged Sierra Maestra Mountains, the 26th of July movement began its long, tough fight against Batista's army. But this was a war on 2 fronts. The first was fought with ambushes and raids. The second, and arguably more important, was the war for public opinion through a secret radio station. Radio rebelled or rebel Radio Castro's voice now echoed from the mountains across the island. He hammered home the same ideas from History Will Absolve Me, creating a powerful story of good versus evil, a people's army against a corrupt dictator. He essentially became the narrator of the revolution, uniting people behind his cause. He spoke of sacrifice, patriotism, and the promise of a better future, and his words helped bring new recruits and win the critical support of Cuba's rural poor. His voice was a constant presence, turning defeats into moral victories and keeping the revolution's spirit alive. By January 1st, 1959, it was over. Batista fled the country. Days later, Fidel Castro and his bearded rebels, the Barbudos rode into Havana to the cheers of massive crowds. The war was won. Now the real revolution, transforming an entire society, was about to begin. And Castro's main tool was, once again, his voice. His speeches changed. He was no longer just a rebel leader. He was a nation builder. He had to explain and justify the massive changes on the horizon. Just months after taking power, he stood before a joyful crowd and warned them that the road ahead would be hard and would demand sacrifice and unity. He immediately drew a hard line, declaring that anyone who threatened the revolution was a traitor. Castro's marathon speeches became a fixture of Cuban life. Broadcast live on TV and radio, giving him a direct line to the people. He used them to announce and defend radical policies like the agrarian reform law that broke up huge estates and the nationalization of American-owned businesses, which put Cuba on a direct collision course with the U.S. These speeches rallied support for his government, but also built a powerful us versus them mentality, praising revolutionary loyalty and condemning any opposition as betrayal. The power of language to shape our world is incredible, isn't it? If you think so too, and you enjoyed this look at rhetoric and revolution, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to ring the bell so you won't miss our next story about history's most powerful speakers. Castro didn't just talk to Cubans. He quickly took his message to the world stage, positioning Cuba as a beacon of resistance for developing nations. His defining moment came on October 12, 1979, at the United Nations in New York. He wasn't just speaking for Cuba. He was there as the head of the Non-Aligned Movement, a group of 95 countries. And he didn't hold back. He famously said, "I have not come to speak of Cuba, ... I have come to speak on behalf of the peoples of the world." He attacked the massive economic gap between rich and poor nations, asking, why should some people have to walk barefoot so that others can travel in fancy cars? Why should some live only 35 years so that others can live 70? He demanded a new world economic order built on fairness, rejecting American dominance and speaking up for the global South. The speech hit a nerve, winning him allies across the world and cementing his status as a major Cold War figure. But it also hardened the opposition from the United States, which saw his revolutionary ideas as a direct threat. So what is the legacy of Castro's revolution and the speeches that powered it? It's incredibly complicated. On one hand, you have undeniable social achievements. Following through on his early promises, Cuba launched a massive literacy campaign in 1961 that practically wiped out illiteracy. The state built a free universal healthcare system that became a model for other nations. And for a significant period, especially in the 1970s and 80s, Cuba was one of the most economically equal societies in the world. But there's a dark side to that legacy, that promise to restore the democratic 1940 Constitution. It was briefly referenced in early reforms, but ultimately cast aside as Castro consolidated power. Instead, Cuba became a one-party state that crushed all dissent. The same speeches that spoke of liberation were also used to brand opponents as traitors and counter-revolutionaries. For decades, speaking out could land you in prison, creating a climate of fear. This repression, along with economic struggles, led hundreds of thousands of Cubans to flee their homeland. From that first act of defiance in a courtroom to his booming speeches on the world stage, Fidel Castro's words were the engine of his revolution. He wrote a story of national pride and justice that moved millions, but he also used that same story to justify a system that took away basic freedoms. You simply can't separate the Cuban Revolution from the man who narrated it into existence. It's a powerful lesson that, in the right hands, words can be every bit as mighty as armies, able to build new worlds and tear down old ones. What do you think was the most powerful part of his message? Was it the promise of justice or the fight against imperialism? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.